Hey guys, tonight we're going to explore a deeply private and haunting aspect of one of England's most infamous kings, Henry VIII. We'll unveil the untold stories, the intimate secrets hidden behind his bedroom doors, where 6 women were forced to confront loveless marriages, strange desires, and tragic wedding nights. Imagine their weary bodies and tormented spirits, powerless against the brutal authority of a fanatical king, yet unable to refuse his bedchamber command. Every time Henry retreated behind the curtains was not a romantic moment, but a form of torture, where his power overwhelmed all personal desires. Their stories aren't just about power. They delve into suffering and the silent cries in the darkness, endured just to produce the heir the court demanded. Ultimately, this is a saga of the resilience and the struggle for survival of women whose fates were determined by a cruel king. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And right now, where are you watching from and what time is it where you are? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Tonight, lower the lights, brew yourself a cup of warm tea or a fragrant hot cocoa, and settle in comfortably. As the night begins to seep into every corner of the room, we will step together into a space full of mystery, where the gentle sounds of a soft musical score and the whisper of wind through the cracks feel like hushed invitations. With just one glance at a flickering candle, you will sense a strange warmth spreading, awakening your half-asleep senses. In that setting, allow your mind to wander into the story of 6 talented women, Henry VIII's future brides. They crossed the threshold between the palace's dazzling grandeur and the Tudor bedchamber's dark shadows, each on a mission both glorious and perilous. Each carried within her great longings and ambitions, some for power, some for freedom, and some simply to live in peace. In the year 1509, Henry VIII, a strong and at times somewhat ruthless king, welcomed 6 brides to the gateway of his life. 5 of them would never leave that room again. Only one would be able to breathe freely after Henry was gone. You have perhaps heard tales of the shocking executions, of marriages annulled and divorces that rocked all of Europe. But tonight, we will set aside those verdicts to listen instead to the quiet breaths, the shuddering heartbeats in the darkness, and the thoughts hidden behind crimson velvet drapes. Imagine the scene: a flickering candle flame, blood-red curtains brushing the floor, and the strange scent of incense enveloping the air. You will not see splendid brocade robes, but instead beads of sweat glinting on foreheads, touches that stain with blood and tears, mingled with the scent of spilled wine and unrelenting fear. This is the Tudor arena of desire that few histories dare to describe. There, power does not rest on a throne but lies in each of Henry's outstretched hands, in every faint moan of a queen, and in all the fleeting sounds of the royal household. These young women were not soulless figures of history. They were people of feeling and intellect. They dared to believe in love, to challenge prejudice, and to sacrifice for what they deemed right. Sometimes they faltered in grief. Sometimes they rose again through sheer resilience and cunning. After each tragedy, a new image emerged. A steel-spined Catherine of Aragon, an Anne Boleyn radiant with determination, a Jane Seymour gentle yet unbreakable. So, to understand these Tudor rosebuds more deeply, we must first close the cacophonous doors of modern life. Pause all your worries, set aside the clamoring headlines, and become a guest in a realm where the royal court becomes an enchanted vale. There, miracles and nightmares intertwine, aspirations and suffering entwine, creating a story never fully told. Tonight, you will not only hear how they died, but also feel their hearts' beats, witness their restless gazes, catch the whispers of power, and sense the pain that forged history. In doing so, the tale will grow less dry and richer in humanity. Relax your body, inhale deeply, and let your spirit flow into each sentence like a quiet stream meandering through deserted mountains. Every passing moment is a step drawing us closer to concealed truths, to the loneliness within the royal chambers, and to the muffled cries of power. I invite you to begin this journey with me, a voyage through history steeped in blood, passion, and indomitable will. Believe that even within a corner of caged resentment and a cold throne, these women found ways to live, to love, and to fight. Tonight, we will go with them, listen to their stories, and perhaps find a sliver of light for ourselves amid the Tudor night's glowing candle. Now, once more, lower the lights, take a slow sip of your warm drink, and drift away with me into this enchanting historical realm. We come now to the first wife, Catherine of Aragon, the Spanish girl whose wedding night became a political trial. Imagine yourself at 17, newly arrived in a strange land where the weight of two powerful kingdoms rests upon your slender shoulders. You must prove your worth to preserve an alliance between Spain and England. This was Catherine's fate in the year 1501, when she was promised to Prince Arthur, the 15-year-old elder brother of the future King Henry VIII. Their wedding night was no romantic escape beneath the moon. It was a public ordeal in which court officials stood outside the chamber, awaiting word that the door had truly been closed. Arthur was 15, Catherine was 16 ages, that in Tudor England signified immediate responsibility to produce heirs. Rather than a private union of affection, their marriage bed functioned as a diplomatic instrument. Its success measured by the closing of a chamber door under official scrutiny. 7 months of tentative joy followed at Lello Castle in Wales, a fortress perched atop windswept cliffs, its grey stones warmed by the hopeful laughter of two young people thrust into history's merciless tide. Yet that fragile happiness collapsed when Arthur fell ill, likely to plague, and died, leaving Catherine widowed and alone. Arthur's sudden death plunged the court into crisis. Had he fulfilled his duty by claiming Catherine's virginity? If so, her hand might be granted to another. If not, her value could be deemed insufficient, imperiling the Spanish-English alliance. The answer to this question would determine Catherine's fate for the next 35 years. Rather than succumb to despair, Catherine turned suspicion into her most potent weapon. Kept in England as a valuable pawn, living without pay and stripped of freedom, she might have broken. Instead, she resolved to become the perfect princess in Tudor eyes. She mastered English with astonishing fluency, absorbing its idioms until she spoke like a native. She studied local customs, attended banquets, and forged discreet friendships with influential nobles. Most importantly, she crafted an image of the untouchable virgin princess, above scandal and rumour. Whenever a tribunal convened to investigate the consummation of her marriage to Arthur, Catherine stood her ground. She painted Arthur as frail, emphasizing his short stature, his frequent illness, and insisted their union had never been consummated. In private, Spanish chronicles recorded Arthur's boastful accounts, but Catherine recognized that people choose to believe the story they wish to hear. Through carefully woven testimony and dignified composure, she seized control of her narrative and preserved her reputation. 8 years passed under this uneasy limbo, until the year 1509, when Henry succeeded as king. Despite political upheaval, he held a special admiration for Catherine not only for her beauty, but for her intellect, her steadfast dignity, and her remarkable ability to reshape her circumstances. Their second wedding night, solemnized in Greenwich Palace, marked the official start of Catherine's reign as queen. No longer merely a political bride, she became Henry's partner in governance, a true strategist whose subtle influence captivated both king and court. During those 8 years of quiet reputation building, Catherine laid the groundwork for her future power. She attended council meetings and offered measured counsel on matters of state. She corresponded fluently in Latin and French with foreign ambassadors, demonstrating her erudition. When Henry campaigned abroad, Catherine served as regent, managing finances, negotiating treaties, and ensuring England's stability in his absence. Yet behind these public triumphs lay Catherine's private torment. She endured multiple pregnancies, each ending in miscarriage, stillbirth, or newborn death. Tudor medicine offered little beyond herbal concoctions, bleeding, and prayers. Each loss inflicted excruciating physical pain and emotional devastation, and still, she bore it with quiet resolve. Instead of retreating into grief, she turned sorrow into action, founding hospitals, supporting scholars, and funding religious institutions. Her charitable works softened public sympathy and reinforced her image as a compassionate queen. Through every ordeal, Catherine remained unyielding in her claim to Henry's love and her daughter Mary's rightful place in the succession. When Henry, desperate for a male heir, sought an annulment, Catherine did not yield. She fought her case before papal legates, writing impassioned letters to her nephew, the Holy Roman Emperor, and delivering eloquent defenses of her marriage. Under oath, she affirmed that Arthur had never consummated their marriage, preserving her union with Henry in the eyes of God. Her courageous stance transformed Catherine into a symbol of resistance. Though the annulment ultimately prevailed, driven by Henry's political maneuvers and Rome's acquiescence, Catherine's steadfast faith and dignified endurance won sympathy across Europe. Even after her status was stripped and she was confined to Kimbolton Castle, she continued to sign her letters, Catherine the Queen, never relinquishing her title in spirit. In the hushed corridors of court, Catherine's story became legend. She was the Spanish princess who defied rumour and machination to claim her voice, who turned exile into opportunity and private sorrow into public service. Her evolution from young bride to seasoned queen underscored that power in Tudor England could be wielded through narrative as effectively as by armies on the battlefield. As Catherine's life drew to a close in the year 1536, bedridden and wearied by illness, she left behind a legacy of unparalleled resilience. Her funeral procession bore only the title of Queen, a final testament to her lifelong claim. Thus concludes the chapter on Catherine of Aragon, the Spanish girl whose first wedding night was a public ordeal and whose second wedding night inaugurated a reign of intellect and dignity. Her story reminds us that even in the most oppressive circumstances, a determined woman can command her own narrative, transforming suspicion into strength and adversity into triumph. Let Catherine's example linger in our thoughts, that true power lies not in force alone but in the courage to define one's own story. The early years of the Tudor marriage brought Catherine of Aragon brilliant chapters, like a gentle overture in the grand symphony of power. Henry VIII, the young emperor newly crowned, sang the highest praises not only of her radiant beauty but also of her virtue, learning, and the distinctly Spanish grace she exuded. Catherine spoke many languages fluently: Latin, French, Italian, and English, and possessed a deep, devout faith which made the royal court both imposing and irresistibly alluring. When Henry departed for France, temporarily leaving the throne to wage war, he entrusted England to Catherine's skillful hands. In her role as regent, the young queen not only maintained internal order but also thwarted Scotland's invasion plot. Reports of Catherine's military and diplomatic leadership recorded a resounding victory, forcing enemies to retreat while courtiers throughout England lauded her achievements. They likened Catherine to an irreplaceable heart of the realm, a woman of gentle beauty who nonetheless wielded formidable power. Yet that golden dream quickly dissolved beneath the weight of countless failed pregnancies. Medieval medicine could not explain obstetric complications, knew nothing of genetics or modern physiological causes. Within the hushed confines of the royal chambers, Catherine endured repeated miscarriages, stillbirths, or infants who survived only a few days. Each loss felt like a dagger carving into her soul, creating vast emptiness within her heart. Nevertheless, Catherine refused to let her anguish crush her. Instead, she discovered a new purpose, transforming personal pain into public good. Catherine founded hospitals, dedicating her resources and influence to heal the poor and suffering. She supported scholars in their research and teaching, laying the groundwork for the education of women. She organized lectures on ethics and learning, spreading compassion throughout a court often known for its austerity. Contemporary accounts note that the Spanish queen not only bore the weight of state responsibilities, but also brought a warmth of humanity that melted even the coldest hearts. When Henry realized the peril of lacking a male heir, he sought to command an annulment from Catherine, claiming their marriage was cursed by heaven for failing to produce a son. He petitioned the Holy See to overturn the previous marital decree. But the Spanish queen refused to remain passive. Before the cardinals and ecclesiastical judges, she steadfastly maintained that Arthur had never drawn close to her, affirming that their union had been purely political and remained virgin in the eyes of God. Catherine even sent earnest letters to the Pope and relayed news to her nephew, the future Holy Roman Emperor, detailing Henry's ruthless manipulation of power to break the alliance. The brutal legal battle dragged on for years, fraught with political pressure that trampled both royal law and canon law. Although the final verdict allowed Henry to remarry, Catherine won the moral victory. She was permitted to keep the title of Queen until her very last moments. Even after Henry stripped her of the crown, styling her as Princess of Wales, and confining her to Kimbolton Castle, Catherine continued to wear her wedding ring and signed every letter, Catherine the Queen. She persisted in influencing national policy, asserting her authority through powerful correspondence addressed to both the Privy Council and the Church. When Catherine died in the year 1536, she left behind a legacy of indomitable courage and sharp political strategy. She was remembered not merely as a victim of an emperor, but as a paragon of a woman who dared to stand up for her rights and refused to bow to any pressure. Subsequent generations recall Catherine of Aragon as living proof of spiritual strength, showing that even in the harshest circumstances, a woman can become a guiding beacon of justice, of compassion, and of enduring service to the common good. Now, let us explore the next wife of Henry VIII, Anne Boleyn, the messenger of a silent revolution. In the mid-1520s, the Tudor court welcomed a completely novel figure, Anne Boleyn, the French-bred princess from the capital London. She was not only ravishingly beautiful, but also carried with her the refined, witty, and keen spirit of French culture. Anne had grown up in the royal households of France and the Low Countries, where women were encouraged to study, to debate, and to shine through intellect. It was there that she forged the conviction that knowledge and poise were the strongest weapons. When Henry VIII, the most powerful king in Europe, felt compelled to cast aside his wife in search of a male heir, his gaze fell upon Anne in the year 1526. Unlike other court beauties who would have quickly bent their heads in supplication, Anne did not hasten to yield to the emperor's entreaties. Instead, she chose to disappear with calculated strategy, maintaining a 7-year distance full of cunning. During that time, Anne would at moments appear like a tropical breeze, sending Henry luxurious silk cloaks, granting him feather-like kisses just sufficient to keep his heart yearning. But whenever Henry broached the subject of the wedding night, she skillfully evaded with graceful remarks, or by steering the conversation toward politics, religion, or literature. That seductive interruption only fanned Henry's desire ever higher, like a flame blown fiercely by the wind. Their love, or rather, their intricate strategy, was woven through ardent letters. Henry wrote at length about his sighs whenever he received no response, lauding Anne's perfect curves that made his heart ache. Anne replied not merely with sweetness, but with spirited debates on politics, by sharing translations of Protestant scriptures, and by offering wise observations on European education and culture. She transformed their intimate bond into an intellectual alliance. Henry fell in love not only with her beauty, but with the partner in ideas he found in her. Finally, in January of the year 1533, after so many former queens had been cast aside, Henry secretly married Anne and declared her the true Queen of England. This was not merely Anne's personal triumph, but also the spark that ignited the English Reformation. Anne deftly used her influence as queen to protect Protestant scholars, to translate and disseminate reformist texts, and to lay the groundwork for England's break from Rome. The English court suddenly buzzed with lively debates. Hushed lectures circulated through the hallways, and the new queen appeared as a symbol of renewal. However, the greater the power, the fiercer the envy. When Anne faced difficulties in childbirth and was unable to deliver a male heir, conservative factions at court moved to depose her. They falsely accused Anne of adultery with multiple men, even some close to her, to strip her of power and honour. She was placed under house arrest, deprived of her titles, and brought to trial that ended in her execution sentence. All of Anne's plans and efforts over the past 8 years seemed to collapse before the ruthless tide of political intrigue. Yet Anne Boleyn's story is more than a personal tragedy. Above all, it demonstrates the miracle of perseverance, the passion for intellect, and the courage to confront societal prejudice. From a French princess to the Queen of England, Anne wrote a new chapter in history. No longer was she a woman who merely obeyed, but a warrior of thought who paved the way for women's autonomy and education. Despite cruel fate, she left an enduring mark on how a woman could use wit and fortitude to challenge absolute power. And when night fell over the palace, its cold stone walls still echoed the name Anne Boleyn, messenger of a silent revolution, who proved that sometimes a single courageous voice is enough to ignite the fire that transforms a kingdom. Now let us turn to the next wife of Henry VIII, Jane Seymour, whose strategy of submission and tragic recompense would shape the course of Tudor history. Only 11 days after Anne Boleyn's execution, the king's gaze fell upon Jane Seymour, a gentle lady-in-waiting who had witnessed firsthand Henry's dealings with both Catherine of Aragon and Anne Boleyn. Jane was nearly 30 years old, an age at which many Tudor courtiers thought a woman past her prime in royal matchmaking. Yet it was precisely Jane's maturity of character, her keen observation of her predecessors' fates, and her uncanny understanding of the king's desires that allowed her to win his favour where others had perished. Unlike Anne Boleyn, who had tested the boundaries of royal power with spirited debate and tantalising evasion, Jane offered no argument, no challenge to Henry's authority. She neither clamoured for attention nor sought to dazzle with intellectual displays. Instead, Jane adopted an attitude of respectful adoration. She treated Henry as if he were a divine sovereign rather than a mere mortal man, greeting him with soft smiles, unwavering loyalty, and an ever-present willingness to fulfill the sacred duties of queen consort. She never complained about his growing girth or his failing health. She never questioned his decisions or second-guessed his impulses. In the austere environment of the Tudor court, where intrigue and rivalry ran rampant, Jane's serene devotion stood out like a beacon of calm. This combination of humility and gentle strength touched a chord in Henry's heart, for he yearned above all else for total submission and unquestioning loyalty. The marriage between Henry and Jane unfolded with astonishing rapidity. Merely 24 hours after Anne Boleyn's funeral rites concluded, Henry publicly sought Jane's hand. Courtiers gasped at the speed of events. Some whispered that the king's grief had not yet run cold. 11 days later, in a ceremony of private solemnity, Henry presented Jane with an engagement ring. Yet Jane, mindful of preserving her dignity, and perhaps wary of repeating Anne's fate, did not capitulate at once. She insisted upon a proper and decorous wedding ceremony, free from any taint of scandal or impropriety. She negotiated for vows that took place in the Grand Chapel of Hampton Court, ensuring that her union would be conducted with full religious sanction. In doing so, Jane cleverly balanced her own honour against the king's impatience, making Henry feel both respected and gratified in his passion. When at last Jane Seymour was crowned queen in the spring of the year 1533, the realm rejoiced. For Jane, the title of queen was not merely ornamental, it was an opportunity to serve the kingdom she had learned to love. In her early months as queen, she accompanied Henry at state functions and council meetings, offering gentle counsel on matters of domestic policy. She maintained her reputation for discretion, never overshadowing the king's authority, and yet winning the affection of courtiers who admired her quietly competent leadership. 2 years into her queenship, on the 10th of October, in the year 1536, Jane gave birth to the long-awaited male heir, Edward. From the moment that royal infant first cried, trumpets sounded in London, and masses were held in every cathedral. England had its prince at last, the son who would secure the Tudor line for another generation. Henry wept with joy, declaring that his search for a legitimate male successor was at an end after 3 decades of frustration. The realm celebrated with feasts, tournaments, and the ringing of church bells. Yet triumph turned swiftly to tragedy. After a grueling labour that lasted more than 30 hours, Jane contracted what physicians called childbed fever, an infection caused by unhygienic conditions and the rudimentary state of Tudor medicine. Royal physicians who bled her, applied poultices of herbs, and prayed fervently could not halt the disease's progression. On the 12th day after Edward's birth, Jane fell into delirium. She uttered a few faint words of comfort to her newborn son and to Henry, who refused to leave her bedside. At the age of 35, Queen Jane Seymour breathed her last, leaving the king bereft and the nation plunged into sorrow. Henry's grief was profound and public. He donned mourning garments for several months, an unprecedented display of royal lamentation. He made arrangements for Jane to be interred beside his father in St. George's Chapel at Windsor, a place of honour befitting a queen who had given him his greatest hope. In his will, Henry himself instructed that, should he die first, he wished to be buried alongside Jane, a testament to the depth of his affection and regret. Despite the brevity of her time as queen consort, Jane Seymour's legacy endured. She had proven the power of what might be called strategic submission. In the perilous landscape of Tudor politics, she showed that yielding at precisely the right moment could secure the ultimate victory. By embracing the role of devoted companion, she not only won Henry's heart, but also stabilized the monarchy after the tumult of her predecessor's downfall. Her comportment offered a model for how a queen might exercise influence quietly through acts of compassion, through a discreet presence, and through loyalty that transcended personal ambition. Moreover, Jane's sacrifice had lasting political consequences. By giving birth to Edward, she secured the succession and ensured a Protestant-leaning regency under Edward Seymour, Duke of Somerset, who would govern during young Edward's minority. This paved the way for further religious reforms and the solidification of the Church of England, developments that might not have been possible without the continuity her son provided. Thus, Jane Seymour stands as a poignant emblem of the Tudor era, the gentle queen whose humility and self-sacrifice yielded the greatest reward, yet also the greatest cost. Her life reminds us that in the dance of power, sometimes the softest steps can determine the fate of nations. In the hush of history's corridors, her memory lingers as a testament to the delicate balance between devotion and agency, between personal loss and political triumph, and to the enduring impact of a woman who chose to serve. Now, let us turn to the next wife of Henry VIII, Anne of Cleves, the woman who transformed humiliation into freedom. In December of the year 1539, the Tudor court buzzed with anticipation for a diplomatic marriage to Anne of Cleves, sister of the Duke of Cleves in the German territories. The alliance was intended to strengthen Protestant ties against the Catholic powers of Europe. Henry VIII, relying on the idealized portrait painted by Hans Holbein, chose Anne sight unseen. Yet when they finally met, Henry found her nothing like the graceful figure in the painting. She spoke no English, knew little of English customs, and carried with her the formal etiquette of her German upbringing. At their first meeting in Rochester, Henry, disguised in plain clothes, hoped to test Anne's recognition. Instead, she greeted him politely, but did not realize he was the king. Mortified, Henry blamed Anne's lack of subtlety and her appearance for the awkward encounter. That wedding night proved even more mortifying. In private, Henry confessed that he could not go into the chamber with Anne because of his physical and mental exhaustion, blaming her for not being sufficiently alluring. For the next half year, their marriage lay dormant, barely acknowledged in court circles. But Anne refused to crumble under the weight of royal displeasure. Instead, she chose a path of quiet dignity. She began to study English in secret, learning its idioms and rhythms. She observed local manners, attending court functions and cultivating relationships with the most influential nobles. Her earnest efforts won her unexpected goodwill among the English aristocracy. When Henry grew tired of the union and demanded an annulment, Anne agreed swiftly, but with shrewd stipulations of her own. She negotiated a generous settlement, the estates of Richmond Palace and the manor of Cleves, a handsome annual income, and the lifelong honorific, the king's beloved sister. This agreement ensured not only her financial independence, but also preserved her royal status, an unprecedented privilege for a former Tudor queen. No other ex-queen had ever maintained such dignity after leaving the marital bed. Freed from the confines of court politics, Anne became the wealthiest woman in England, outside the Queen herself. In the years that followed, Anne revelled in her autonomy. She travelled throughout the kingdom, visiting her former companions and the very courtiers who had once whispered behind her back. She hosted foreign dignitaries with grace and ease, demonstrating that a woman scorned by a king could still command respect. Her household at Richmond thrived under her stewardship. She managed the estates with acumen, invested in burgeoning trade ventures, and supported local artisans. Anne's life became a testament to independent strength, as she showed that a noblewoman could flourish outside the shadows of marriage. While Henry plunged headlong into successive marriages fraught with intrigue and danger, Anne of Cleves enjoyed a fulfilling and stable existence. She bore no children of her own, but remained a beloved figure to Henry's 4 children, who affectionately called her Sister of the King. Her support for charitable causes was well known. She endowed hospitals, funded the repair of parish churches, and donated liberally to scholars and artists. These acts of generosity further burnished her reputation as a caring patron and as a paragon of Protestant virtue. The greatest legacy Anne achieved was not her brief tenure as queen, but her masterful conversion of personal humiliation into genuine freedom. By securing her settlement and refusing bitterness, she taught all of Europe that flexibility and resilience are powerful tools for women navigating treacherous political currents. Over the subsequent 17 years, until her death in the year 1557, Anne lived in good health and high spirits. Her life intertwined with Tudor affairs, yet free of peril. She wore the title Duchess of Richmond, with pride, and never relinquished her surname of Cleves, a symbol of her dual heritage and independence. When Anne of Cleves died, she left behind a legacy of quiet triumph. The events of her life embodied the principle of losing the battle but winning the war. In a harsh era when women's fortunes often rose and fell on the caprices of kings, Anne distinguished herself by her wit, her composure, and her refusal to be defined by rejection. Her story remains a powerful reminder that true freedom can spring from the ashes of disgrace, and that a woman who claims her own destiny can outshine even the greatest monarchs of her time. Now, let us turn to the next wife of Henry VIII, Catherine Howard, youth, love, and tragedy. Just months after Anne of Cleves quietly enjoyed her newfound freedom, Henry VIII set his sights on young Catherine Howard, the niece of the Duke of Norfolk and former lady-in-waiting to Anne. Catherine was only 18 or 19 years old, a mere adolescent by Tudor standards, yet already possessed a sharp wit, a youthful allure, and a deep longing for affection. The Tudor court, with its labyrinth of intrigue and its ruthless hierarchy, proved a harsh school for the unprepared. Deprived of a proper education and entrusted to negligent relatives, Catherine learned both the art of seduction and the necessity of caution far too quickly. When Henry first laid eyes on Catherine at court in the spring of the year 1540, he was more than 50 years old and suffering from chronic ailments that made him acutely aware of his own mortality. He became infatuated with Catherine's fresh innocence and her buoyant spirit. In the velvet-lined halls of Hampton Court she basked in royal favour, adorned in lavish gowns, bedecked with jewels, and invited to dance upon silken carpets. For a season, Catherine tasted the heady sweetness of being Queen's favourite, her laughter echoing in corridors where only hushed whispers had once prevailed. Yet youth without experience can be perilous. Catherine allowed Thomas Culpeper, a childhood acquaintance from her time serving Anne of Cleves, to accompany her frequently, exchanging whispered letters of ardent devotion and spending long hours in each other's company. Unaware of the razor-thin line she was treading, Catherine did not grasp that any hint of impropriety with a man other than the king could spell ruin. In the Tudor court, where gossip spread faster than wildfire, suspicion alone could seal a woman's fate. By the year 1541, rumours of Catherine's closeness to Culpeper reached the ears of powerful courtiers eager for scandal. Though no incontrovertible proof of a physical affair existed, these nobles seized upon the whispers to accuse Catherine of adultery, a crime punishable by death for a married woman. The royal council, determined to protect the king's honour and to eliminate any threat to the succession, rapidly assembled a commission that drafted a gruesome indictment. 18 counts of adultery, including alleged liaisons with members of her own household. Catherine was confined to the Tower of London, her resplendent life at court replaced by stone chambers and the cold weight of iron bars. News of her downfall rippled through England, turning once admiring gazes into stunned disbelief. Amid the Tower's silent gloom, Catherine spent her final days practicing the grace of resignation. Witnesses later reported that she rehearsed laying her head upon the block, determined to meet her end with composure and, as the chroniclers put it, a rare dignity. On the 13th day of February in the year 1542, Catherine Howard was led to Tower Green, her neck unveiled to the chill breeze. She knelt before the executioner, her pale throat exposed like a white lily in winter. With trembling voice, she offered a prayer, then placed her head upon the execution block. In that moment, her tears fell not in bitterness but in sorrow for the life cut short. A life that had sought love and found only betrayal by the very system that raised her. Catherine's tragic end laid bare the brutal reality faced by women in a society that measured their worth by a narrow standard of purity or licentiousness. She was neither mastermind nor naive. Catherine was simply too young, too unprepared to navigate the lethal snare of courtly politics and royal expectation. Her youthful zeal for affection collided with a system that weaponized sex to reinforce power. In Catherine's story, we confront a profound question. In a culture that judges women by their virtue or vice, is there room for survival based on tenderness and sincerity alone? Catherine Howard's brief tenure as queen and her subsequent downfall stand as a stark testament to the dangers inherent in a world ruled by caprice and cruelty. Yet her memory endures beyond the scaffold. She reminds us that innocence can be both a blessing and a curse, that love pursued without caution may lead to ruin, and that even the brightest youth can be extinguished by forces far older and more dangerous than herself. In the hush of history's aftermath, Catherine's life and death continue to resonate as a cautionary tale of a girl whose heart sought warmth, but found only the cold shadow of tragedy. Now, let us turn to the final wife of Henry VIII, Catherine Parr, the last rose and the miracle of survival. In the year 1543, after Henry VIII had passed through the doors of 5 marriages, the famed king sought the hand of Catherine Parr, a twice-widowed woman of 31 years, wealthy from inheritance and seasoned in political navigation. In Tudor eyes, a woman in her early 30s teetered on the edge of too old and too dangerous, yet Catherine possessed a serene confidence that both soothed Henry's tempestuous spirit and preserved her own integrity. She arrived at court bearing not only fresh widow's grace, but also a shrewd understanding of factional power qualities that made her uniquely suited to be the king's companion in his final years. Unlike Catherine of Aragon, who had battled for her honour, or Anne Boleyn, who had wielded her intellectual spark, Catherine Parr fought for something more enduring, the healing of family rifts and the forging of religious peace. She sought to reconcile Mary and Elizabeth into the line of succession, to mediate between the Catholic conservatives and the invigorated Protestant reformers, and to serve as patroness to Protestant scholars whose cause pulsed quietly beneath the palace's grand tapestries. During the last years of Henry's life, Catherine acted almost as a vice-regent, overseeing the king's medical care, managing the flood of state correspondence, and even greeting foreign ambassadors in his stead. In those capacities, she became the palace's de facto Lord Regent, yet she retained a humility that never overshadowed the king. Catherine's greatest triumph lay in her ability to endure and adapt. When conservative nobles levelled charges of heresy against her, accusing her of harbouring seditious Protestant beliefs, she refused to engage in head-on conflict. Instead, she performed a masterful act of contrition before Henry. With tears in her eyes, she offered a humble apology and explained that any religious discussions she had hosted were meant only to soothe the king's bodily pains with the comfort of learning, rather than to subvert his authority. This deft performance acted as a soporific balm to Henry's wrath, prompting him to rescind the arrest warrant and to regard Catherine once more as his loyal queen. When Henry finally drew his last breath on the 30th of January in the year 1547, Catherine Parr found herself a young widow once more, but now with both freedom and great wealth. She did not linger in mourning. In the autumn of that same year, Catherine married Thomas Seymour, Lord Admiral and the king's brother-in-law. That union fulfilled her long-cherished dream of a personal happiness, unanchored to dynastic duty. Sadly, her joy was brief. While expecting her only child, Catherine succumbed to complications in childbirth in the summer of 1548, leaving behind only her husband's grief and a reputation for extraordinary resilience. Throughout her life, Catherine Parr was sometimes criticized for her deft survival tactics, accused by some of bending too easily before royal authority. Yet it was precisely that skill, knowing when to speak and when to humble herself, that enabled her to outlast every other of Henry's queens. She preserved her life, secured her influence, and ensured the smooth succession of Edward VI. Her story demonstrates that true wisdom need not be synonymous with cunning machination. Sometimes it is the art of subtle engagement, of choosing the right moment to voice conviction and the right moment to yield grace, that ensures one's enduring impact. Thus ends the tale of Catherine Parr, the final Tudor queen who transformed servitude into sovereignty, who balanced conviction with compassion, and who proved that in the crucible of a ruthless court, it is often the softest touch that wields the greatest power. As the dusk settles over the annals of Tudor England, Catherine Parr's example lingers a testament to the miracle of survival, the grace of adaptability, and the lasting brilliance of a rose that blossomed in the shadow of 5 former queens. Now, let us explore the hidden bonds among Henry VIII's 6 wives, how, despite their very public tragedies and formal separations, they nonetheless found ways to support, respect, and protect one another. Though the first 4 queens endured strikingly different fates, each carried a measure of empathy for her successors and predecessors. Catherine of Aragon, deposed and displaced yet ever dignified, chose never to publicly condemn Anne Boleyn when she supplanted her. When the scandal that engulfed Anne Boleyn reached its climax, Contemporaneous reports suggest that Catherine, by then retired to her modest lodging at Kimbolton, felt a secret pang of sorrow for the younger woman's plight. Catherine's restraint, rooted in her deeply held faith and her commitment to Christian charity, remained a testament to her enduring compassion. Jane Seymour, upon her elevation to Queen, immediately set about advocating for the restoration of Mary Tudor, Catherine's daughter, to the line of succession. Jane recognized Mary's anguish at her mother's fall from favour and sought to heal the rift by urging Henry to reinstate her rights. After Mary's position was secured, Jane turned her attention to Elizabeth, Anne Boleyn's daughter. Elizabeth, too, had been sidelined by her father's volatile marital policies. Jane's quiet interventions earned her Elizabeth's gratitude and respect, forging a bond that transcended courtly rivalry. In Jane Seymour's brief but influential tenure, she wove threads of reconciliation between the king's estranged children, acting as a gentle mediator in their fractured family. Anne of Cleves, though her marriage was annulled within 6 months, similarly maintained warm relations with both Mary and Elizabeth. After her formal separation from Henry, Anne kept an apartment at court and was regularly summoned to attend the princesses at Christmas and other festivals. She sent them generous gifts of books and fine fabrics, and it is said that Mary and Elizabeth often sought Anne's counsel and companionship. In a household rife with suspicion and ambition, Anne of Cleves provided a safe haven of confidences for her young stepdaughters, proof that even a marriage ended by annulment could yield enduring sisterly loyalty. Catherine Howard's brief reign, though tragically cut short, also produced moments of genuine solidarity. Despite her youth and inexperience, Catherine showed kindness toward Mary and Elizabeth in the months before her downfall. She reportedly invited Mary and Elizabeth to private gatherings in her apartments, offering them a measure of the courtly joys from which they had long been excluded. Even as whispers of Catherine's improprieties grew, she continued to extend courtesy and hospitality to her fellow women of the dynasty, a gesture that would not be forgotten by those she sought to uplift. Finally, Catherine Parr, Henry's 6th and last queen, brought all 3 royal children into her maternal circle and championed them with equal devotion. She referred to Mary, Elizabeth, and young Edward as her own dear children, and took a personal interest in their education, ensuring they learned Latin, French, and the Reformed scriptures. In the chaotic transition of power after Henry's death in the winter of 1547, Catherine Parr's steady hand provided the 3 siblings with a measure of security and continuity. She remained in close correspondence with them until her own death in the summer of 1548, leaving behind a sisterly legacy that helped bind the Tudor heirs as a united family. Beyond their personal friendships, these women collectively reshaped the culture of the Tudor court. Catherine of Aragon introduced Spanish religious piety and a passion for literacy, sponsoring humanist scholars and fostering learning among noblewomen. Anne Boleyn brought French fashions and courtly elegance, while also laying the intellectual groundwork for the English Reformation by protecting evangelical scholars. Jane Seymour reaffirmed traditional English values, promoting music, dance, and native literature. Anne of Cleves demonstrated Germanic efficiency in estate management, inspiring English gentry to adopt new methods of commerce and administration. Catherine Howard, though fleetingly queen, infused the court with youthful merriment, encouraging music and dance that lightened the heavy atmosphere of political intrigue. And Catherine Parr, the first English queen to publish books, became a beacon for women's scholarship, her devotional works read widely by both men and women. Although these alliances and acts of mutual support were rarely recorded in formal histories overshadowed by the drama of executions, annulments, and dynastic ambition, they stand today as a testament to the power of sisterhood. Political competition may have set them at odds, but each queen found cause to uphold the dignity of her fellows and to ensure that, in their own ways, they rescued one another from isolation. In the end, Henry VIII may have undone each marriage with an iron will, yet his wives collectively wrought a legacy of female solidarity, education, and compassion. From Catherine's principled forbearance to Parsons' scholarly mentorship, they demonstrated that even in an age when a queen's value was measured by her fertility or her fame, women could rise above circumstance to create a network of mutual respect. Their hidden alliance, unwritten yet enduring, illuminates the pathways of female empowerment and lays a foundation for future generations to cherish the bonds of sisterhood above the rivalries of power. Now, let us close our exploration with a look at Tudor medicine and a humanistic finale to our journey. Behind the splendor of the Tudor court lay hidden physical torments that few dare to imagine. By the 1930s, the 1,532nd Henry VIII bore the accumulated injuries of decades. A grievous leg wound from a jousting accident that never fully healed, possibly complicated by diabetes or vascular disease. Each attempt at intimacy with his queens became for him a nightmare of pain. His uncontrolled weight gain, the sweaty body odor that accompanied it, and the festering sores on his wounded leg made even the gentlest of encounters physically daunting. His wives, in the privacy of the royal bedchamber, learned to manage more than just a royal spouse's volatile affections. They had to cradle and console a body racked by chronic illness, conceal the smell of infection, and adapt to the unpredictable contours of a king in constant discomfort. Tudor physicians, armed only with herbal concoctions, bloodletting, and rudimentary surgical tools, had no understanding of genetics, immunology, or modern obstetrics. When a queen suffered miscarriage or stillbirth, blame fell squarely upon her shoulders. Catherine of Aragon endured this cruel burden. She was taught that her repeated pregnancy failures were divine punishment, though in truth Henry's blood, perhaps carrying a rare antigen, might have provoked immune reactions that led to antenatal loss. Anne Boleyn's and Jane Seymour's tragic deaths followed childbirth complications that today would be easily treated sepsis, that in the 16th century was synonymous with almost certain demise. Only Catherine Parr, shrewdly and sorrowfully, avoided pregnancy entirely, preserving her life through a reluctant but wise decision to keep her distance from the king's bed at critical times. In a household that prized lineage above all, each queen knew that pregnancy was a perilous gamble. Every conception carried the weight of dynastic destiny, every labour a fight against death. Midwives and physicians employed remedies ranging from battlefield tactics, bleeding, purging, and blistering to mystical methods such as gemstones worn at the waist or prayers whispered over herbal poultices. Fasting regimens were prescribed to balance the humours, while opiates and laudanum were administered to ease pain. Yet these treatments often did more harm than good. Blood loss weakened the patient, and poor hygiene spread infection. A queen's confinement to a sweltering bedchamber, her attendants fearful of contagion, created an atmosphere of isolation and dread. Each birth became a tableau of suspense, each postpartum hour a threshold between life and oblivion. And yet, through every miscarriage, stillbirth, and fatal fever, these women carried out their duties with remarkable fortitude. They attended council meetings when they could, corresponded with diplomats, and maintained the decorum expected of a queen. Their public composure masked the reality of their suffering, the bruises on their bodies, the fevers that left them delirious, and the grief that racked their spirits. Their resilience under such primitive medical care speaks not only to their personal strength, but also to a broader truth. The human capacity to endure in the face of physical agony. Understanding their plight deepens our empathy for their courage. They stood before absolute power in a culture that valued female bodies mainly for reproduction, yet they protected their honor and preserved their agency whenever possible. Their scars, both visible and invisible, remind us that the stakes of courtly life went beyond politics and intrigue. They reveal a chapter of medical history defined by trial and error, where each woman's survival hinged as much on her wits as on her womb. In the end, the story of Henry VIII's 6 wives is far from a dry chronicle of royal marriage contracts. It is a tapestry woven from vibrant threads of commerce and culture, of devotion and dissent, of theology and therapy, of politics, sexuality, religion, and the emergence of female sovereignty. They teach us that even within the grand Game of Thrones, the maneuverings of kings and nobles' women could redefine power through intellect, compassion, and self-preservation. Their lives remind us that in any era of oppression or inequality, individual courage can shine through the darkest trials. Today, as we look back on these 6 remarkable women, their voices echo across the centuries. They whisper encouragement to each of us. No matter our circumstances, we must never surrender the right to author our own stories. Their legacies endure not only in stained glass or stone tombs, but in the ongoing struggle for bodily autonomy, access to compassionate medical care, and recognition of women's indispensable roles in shaping history. May their lessons guide us when confronting our own challenges, reminding us that healing and understanding are inseparable, that empathy springs from knowledge of suffering, and that the advances of modern medicine rest upon the courageous endurance of those who suffered before us. Thus, in honoring their memory, we affirm a timeless truth. Amid politics and power, it is our shared humanity and the stories we choose to tell that truly endures. Now, let us drift into the most intimate battleground of the Tudor court, the royal bedchamber, where power, passion, and survival converged beneath silken sheets and flickering candles. In the early days of his reign, Henry VIII was a strapping young jouster, his body honed by sport and youth. But by the 1532 and 40s, he had become a hulking figure, his once agile limbs weighed down by chronic wounds, festering sores, and an ever-increasing waistline. The jousting accident that shattered his leg left him with a wound that never healed, perhaps complicated by diabetes or vascular disease. Each nocturnal encounter, each wedding night, became a trial for both king and queen. The once passionate courtship with Catherine of Aragon gave way to grim determination. She recalled those early nights as moments of sweetness, when Henry's admiration for her intelligence and Spanish grace made him tender and agreeable. But after successive miscarriages and stillbirths, the intimacy turned tragic. Henry approached the bedchamber with a steely resolve, placing the entire future of his dynasty on Catherine's shoulders. She endured the physical pain, his heavy weight pressing upon her, the sting of his infected wound, and the emotional torment of failing to provide a male heir. Night after night, she summoned every ounce of dignity to mask her agony, lest the king's disappointment turn to anger. When Anne Boleyn ascended to the throne, she transformed the bedroom into a theatre of desire. Anne understood that Henry's hunger for novelty ran as deep as his hunger for a son. She played the delicate game of entice and withdraw, a lingering touch here, a flirtatious laugh there, always enough to set his heart racing, yet never enough to satiate him fully. She insisted upon her equality in matters of love, daring to make demands, to express her pleasure, to shape the encounter according to her terms. In candlelit moments, she tested Henry's devotion with whispered conditions, promises of her body, in exchange for promises of loyalty. Yet Henry, accustomed to unquestioned dominance, chafed at this peerage in passion. His vanity could not bear a wife who expected reciprocity. Their marriage, electric and fraught, lit the court ablaze with scandal and intrigue. Jane Seymour, in contrast, chose submission as her strategy. She met Henry's wounded body with a devout calm, never complaining about his weight or his wounds. She treated their union as a sacred duty, silent, obedient, entirely focused on his pleasure and on fulfilling the role of queen by bearing him a son. As Henry's health fluctuated, his temper as unpredictable as his body, Jane's gentle strength soothed him. She reminded him of the vibrant youth he once was, praising his virility even when his limbs trembled. This self-effacing devotion endeared her to the king, but it cost her dearly. After delivering Edward, the long-awaited male heir, she succumbed to postpartum complications. Her body, broken by childbirth and drained by her willingness to serve, gave its last breath in the name of dynastic duty. Anne of Cleves experienced a bedchamber so bleak it might have been a prison cell. Henry, disappointed by her appearance and unable to perform, declared their marriage unconsummated. Anne retreated into her silence, refusing to fight in the intimacy he demanded. Instead, she redirected her energy into negotiating her release. In that cold bedroom where two bodies lay apart, she plotted her freedom and ultimately exchanged marriage for independence. In so doing, she reclaimed her autonomy and transformed her humiliation into liberation. Catherine Howard, scarcely more than a child, approached the bedchamber with the innocence of youth. She believed that Henry's attention was proof of her desirability and the key to her security. But her past liaisons with Thomas Culpeper, reignited by proximity to the king's bed, sealed her fate. The bedchamber that once symbolized possibility became a crucible of accusation. Her stolen glances and clandestine letters, written in the corner of candlelight, were used as evidence of betrayal. At barely 20, she paid the ultimate price for confusing youthful affection with royal grace. Finally, Catherine Parr introduced a new paradigm, the healing bedchamber. She understood Henry's physical limitations and sought to ease them. In private hours, she applied soothing poultices to his leg, massaged his swollen limbs, and whispered comforting words. She transformed their union into an act of care rather than conquest. Her compassion bridged the gap between a king's wounded body and a queen's gentle touch. In doing so, she restored tenderness to a place long stained by political necessity. Throughout the Tudor era, the bedchamber was a crucible of emotion and strategy. Under the flicker of tallow candles and to the scent of herbal ointments, each queen learned to navigate her survival. Catherine withstood brute force and heartbreak. Anne wielded wit and allure. Jane sacrificed her body and life. Anne of Cleves negotiated her freedom. Catherine Howard gambled with her youth. And Catherine Parr offered solace and care. In those intimate nights, royalty and vulnerability collided. The bedchamber was a battlefield where queens resisted, tempted, endured, or healed. Each strategy, defiance, seduction, submission, negotiation, innocence, compassion, shaped a queen's fate. In their struggles, they preserved their dignity, protected their legacy, and asserted the right to tell their own stories. Beneath the velvet canopies, they wielded power in the most personal of arenas, leaving a legacy that still whispers to us that even in darkness, a woman's resourcefulness can turn a chamber of fear into a stage for survival. Now, we turn from matters of power and passion to the lesser-told story of finance at the Tudor court, how 6 queens became instrumental players in a grand chess game of wealth and credit. First, Catherine of Aragon arrived in England carrying not merely beauty and royal lineage, but a dowry of staggering proportions. In the year 1501, Spain's formidable treasury parted with a sum so large it underwrote Henry's early military campaigns against France. Yet Catherine's contribution was not limited to one-time infusion of funds. With the shrewdness of her native Castile, she introduced Spanish double-entry methods of accounting to the royal exchequer. She insisted that receipts and disbursements be recorded in detail, starkly contrasting with the haphazard English ledgers of the day. By reorganizing how revenues were tracked, casting customs duties, subsidies, and wardships into a unified system, she helped shore up the crown's finances and fostered new trading links between England and the continent. Merchant caravans began carrying English cloth to Seville and Antwerp with Catherine's imprimatur, while Spanish investors looked to English ports with fresh interest. Thus, Catherine succeeded beyond mere monetary support. She laid the groundwork for an era of more transparent and systematic fiscal management. Next came Anne Boleyn, whose brief reign of nearly 3 years might seem too fleeting to leave a lasting economic legacy, but hers was one of network and leverage. Born the daughter of a minor nobleman with property in Calais and Holland, Anne had cultivated relationships among Protestant bankers and financiers in Antwerp and London. As queen, she quietly directed patronage toward printing presses in the Low Countries that produced evangelical pamphlets, underwriting them with discreet loans from insiders sympathetic to reform. Through Anne's influence, funds were channeled to support scholars who would later translate the Bible into English, setting in motion economic flows tied to the new religious economy. Though she fell from grace, the financial alliances she brokered endured under Edward's counsel, ensuring that English merchants and printers thrived in an age of religious publishing. Her economic imprint thus outlived her political one, nurturing a nascent market in books and ideas that would fuel England's cultural renaissance. When Jane Seymour ascended the throne, the Seymour family reaped the immediate rewards of proximity to power. Granted vast estates across Wiltshire and Somerset, the Seymours amassed income from rents, fines, and feudal dues. Yet Jane, ever mindful of the broader royal interests, used her position to advocate for the restoration of Mary and Elizabeth to the succession, an act that re-entrenched both princesses within the royal household and preserved their future access to revenues from their own dowries and endowments. By securing Mary's rights, Jane prevented the confiscation of her Welsh estates. Similarly, Elizabeth retained her inherited lands in Kent. These interventions were more than familial concern. They were strategic moves to ensure that the Tudor line maintained financial stability through multiple heirs. Jane's posthumous reputation as the mother of Edward VI further cemented the Seymour ascendancy and financed influential marriages that shaped the gentry for generations. Anne of Cleves' story offers perhaps the most dramatic example of the post-nuptial dowry. Though her marriage to Henry was annulled in July of 1540, she negotiated a settlement that ensured her independence and enriched her greatly. In exchange for her compliance, she received the use of Richmond Palace, the manor of Cleves, and an annual pension in perpetuity. Free from royal obligations, Anne invested these revenues in real estate improvements, converting former royal properties into profitable tenancies. She became one of the wealthiest women in England, her estates run by managers she appointed, many of them Protestant sympathizers whom she had helped during her brief tenure as queen. Her business acumen inspired other aristocratic widows to manage their own lands, laying the foundation for female participation in English landholding long before the legal reforms of the 17th century. Catherine Howard's tenure as queen was short and stormy, but her family's financial stake in her marriage cannot be overlooked. The Howards expended tremendous sums to secure her elevation. Lavish gifts, construction of a private chamber at court, and payments to officials whose support could sway Henry's favour. When Catherine fell, those fortunes evaporated overnight, as the Crown seized Howard properties to cover the costs of her trial and attainder. Yet her case proved an instructive cautionary tale about the risks of investing in royal marriages. Fortunes could be made, but also lost in a heartbeat, underscoring the precariousness of noble finance under royal favour. Finally, Catherine Parr, the last of Henry's queens, left an indelible mark on Tudor philanthropy and education. Drawing on her own inherited wealth from the Parr estates in northern England, she funded scholarships for young women to study at new reading schools in London. She used her personal fortune to finance the printing of devotional tracts and translations of the Psalms, distributing them freely to both noble women and commoners. In less than 5 years, her queen's bounty endowed several chantry schools and a small library at Sudeley Castle. Her financial initiatives extended to endowing funds for the poor of her native county, creating a model of charitable giving that would be emulated by future queens consort. Taken together, the financial torchbearers among Henry VIII's 6 wives did more than supply bullion to the exchequer. They demonstrated that money could be wielded as a tool of policy, a means of fostering intellectual and religious movements, and a way to secure autonomy for women in a male-dominated world. By leveraging dowries, estates, pensions, and personal fortunes, they carved out spheres of influence that transcended the bedroom and the council chamber, proving that economic agency was as critical to survival and legacy as political acumen. In the grand tapestry of Tudor history, their contributions remind us that finance is never merely about numbers. It is about relationships, trust, and the power to shape society. These 6 queens showed that wealth, when managed with intelligence and purpose, could advance education, foster religious reform, rescue dispossessed heirs, secure independence, and even redefine gender roles. Their collective legacy endures in the very structures of English governance and philanthropy, an enduring testament to the transformative potential of money in the hands of determined women. Now, let us explore how the triumphs and tragedies of Henry VIII's 6 queens echoed into the reign of their most famous daughter. Elizabeth I, Anne Boleyn's daughter, and informed her nearly 50 years on the throne. Elizabeth inherited from Catherine of Aragon the lesson of resilience and adherence to principle. Catherine's steadfast refusal to relinquish her title or betray her beliefs before the legates of Rome showed Elizabeth that a royal woman must stand firm when confronted by male authority. When Elizabeth faced inquiries from the Council of the North or pressures from foreign powers over her legitimacy, she recalled Catherine's example: maintain regal dignity, speak truth with calm conviction, and never allow intimidation to break one's resolve. Elizabeth's famous speech to her troops at Tilbury, "I have the heart and stomach of a king," echoed Catherine's unwavering spirit. From Anne Boleyn, Elizabeth absorbed the art of preserving one's personal identity even while wielding sovereign power. Anne's insistence on intellectual parity in the bedchamber foreshadowed Elizabeth's own insistence that she be consulted in matters of state. Elizabeth learned that "I am a queen, and I will not be borne down by any man," could coexist with the courtesy expected at court. This balance enabled her to navigate the fraught religious divisions of her reign. She could charm Catholic ambassadors at banquets, yet issue acts of uniformity enforcing Protestant worship. The authority and grace she displayed derived from Anne's example of refusing to be a passive ornament. Jane Seymour taught Elizabeth the subtler power of gentle influence. Jane's combination of duty and tenderness, caring for Henry in sickness, and presenting herself as a model of queenly devotion, showed that a monarch could rule with softness as well as strength. Elizabeth, when faced with rebellions such as the Northern Rising of 1569, employed a similar blend of firmness and conciliation. She issued pardons to rebels who laid down arms, but she also ensured that leading conspirators were executed. Her policy of clemency, tempered by occasional severity, kept her relatively safe in a realm still smarting from civil war. By appearing merciful, yet decisive, Elizabeth won the loyalty of subjects who might otherwise have turned against her. Anne of Cleves contributed the lesson of rapid adaptation. Thrust into a foreign court by an ill-fated portrait, Anne had learned to master the English language and customs on the fly. Elizabeth, born into a court of conspiracies and shifting alliances, likewise had to pivot quickly. When support among the Privy Council wavered or foreign treaties threatened England's security, Elizabeth could change course, forging alliances with France one year and with Spain the next. Like Anne, she presented a stable facade, even as she navigated stormy politics. Her ability to play the chameleon without sacrificing core principles kept her throne secure. Catherine Howard's brief and tragic tenure offered Elizabeth a cautionary tale about the price of misplaced trust. Catherine's youthful indiscretions and her unwillingness to recognize the lethal stakes of court intrigue reminded Elizabeth that personal affections must be subordinated to political necessity. Elizabeth, though fond of favourites like Robert Dudley, carefully prevented any from gaining undue influence or marrying her without Parliament's consent. She learned from Catherine's fate to guard her heart and her counsel with equal vigilance. Finally, Catherine Parr provided Elizabeth with a model of compassionate leadership and intellectual patronage. Parr's sponsorship of Protestant scholars, her compilation of devotional writings, and her role in reconciling Mary and Elizabeth to the Tudor succession demonstrated that a queen could enact religious tolerance and support education simultaneously. Elizabeth, in turn, generously funded printing presses, allowed translations of classical texts, and encouraged women of rank to patronize learning. She founded grammar schools in both Protestant and Catholic areas, understanding that an educated populace would strengthen her realm. Her golden speech in 1598, praising her subjects for their loyalty and learning, reflected Parr's commitment to both faith and reason. These 6 Tudor queens bequeathed to Elizabeth a treasury of strategies: Catherine's courage, Anne's self-assertion, Jane's gentle influence, Anne of Cleves' adaptability, Catherine Howard's hard-won wisdom about trust, and Catherine Parr's philanthropic intellect. Elizabeth did not simply inherit a crown, she inherited a curriculum in governance. She learned when to resist absolutism, when to yield gracefully, how to turn personal pain into public purpose, and how to forge solidarity among former rivals. Under her rule, England reached unprecedented stability and prosperity. The arts flourished in the Elizabethan era, the navy triumphed against the Armada, commerce expanded to the New World. Yet these accomplishments rested upon the emotional, political, and financial lessons passed down through the bedrooms and privy councils of her mother and 5 stepmothers. Each queen had inscribed her legacy onto Elizabeth's consciousness, and Elizabeth wove those strands into her own tapestry of statecraft. In the quiet of her private chambers, Elizabeth may have recalled late-night conversations she would never speak of, thinking of Catherine pacing her lonely exile, of Anne's whispered debates on theology, of Jane's gentle hands tending wounds, of Anne of Cleves' solitary studies of English law, of Catherine Howard's youthful laughter turned to tragedy, and of Catherine Parr's midnight vigils over arcane manuscripts. Their voices, though silenced by time, guided Elizabeth's judgments. Through their collective example, she mastered the alchemy of power and compassion, of firmness and flexibility, becoming the Virgin Queen whose era remains golden to this day. Now, let us turn our attention to the subtle sisterhood that blossomed among Henry VIII's 6 queens, a fragile but enduring alliance that transcended courtly rivalries and the monarch's shifting favour. Although each Tudor queen faced her own crucible, they were not completely alone. Catherine of Aragon, deposed yet dignified, set the tone. Even after she was stripped of her crown, she refused to speak ill of Anne Boleyn when Anne supplanted her. Catherine's moderation and compassion in the face of personal injustice illustrated a generous spirit that later queens would emulate. Rather than gloat at Anne's ascendancy, Catherine quietly maintained respect for the office of queen, showing that a true sister in adversity does not kick down her fellow woman. When Anne Boleyn herself fell from grace, Mary Catherine's daughter embodied that same generosity. Though Mary had every reason to resent the woman who had helped depose her mother, she instead ensured that members of the Boleyn circle found safety within the palace walls. Mary's protective instinct toward her cousin Elizabeth and other young ladies of Anne's household testified to royal solidarity. In granting sanctuary to those who served Boleyn, Mary became Catherine's ally in a network of female support. Next came Jane Seymour. Upon becoming queen, Jane immediately recognized the precarious status of both Mary and Elizabeth. She acted as mediator between the royal siblings Mary, whose legitimacy Henry had questioned, and Elizabeth, whose mother's demise left her vulnerable. Jane's equitable treatment of both princesses helped heal old wounds and knit the royal family closer together. Through small acts, a shared meal, a gentle word, a moment of attention, Jane built bridges that transcended lineage disputes, reinforcing the idea that sisterhood in court extended beyond bloodlines. In the wake of Jane's tragic death, Anne of Cleves, once a figure of imperial diplomacy, took up the mantle of courtly compassion. Though her marriage to Henry had been annulled, she remained beloved by Mary, Elizabeth, and little Edward. Each midwinter's eve, she received invitations to royal feasts and offered gifts of fruitcake and fine cloth to the young royals. Anne's warmth toward the three children, whom she referred to as "my dear nieces and nephew," fostered an atmosphere of familial care. Her quiet dinners in her private chambers, where she would read bedtime verses to the princesses, left an imprint of nurturance amid the often harsh Tudor world. Finally, when Catherine Parr became queen, she extended motherly guidance to all three of Henry's children. She tutored Mary in pressing correspondence, guided Elizabeth in the etiquette of governance, and comforted Edward when his health was frail. Under Parr's tutelage, the siblings learned to read and discuss theology, to write letters in Latin and French, and to appreciate court pageantry as both spectacle and statecraft. Parr's dedication created a shared educational foundation for the next generation, reinforcing bonds of intellectual sisterhood and brotherhood that outlasted Henry's tumultuous reign. This network of mutual support did not exist solely in private affection. It manifested in public works as well. Catherine of Aragon and Catherine Parr pooled resources to establish hospitals and schools, offering both medical care and basic literacy to London's poor. Anne Boleyn and Jane Seymour championed the printing of vernacular religious texts, broadening access to literacy and spiritual education for women and men alike. Anne of Cleves introduced property management manuals used by ladies of the gentry, creating templates for female land stewardship. Even Catherine Howard, in her brief tenure, raised funds among her attendants to provide dowries for young gentlewomen in need, small acts of solidarity that echoed beyond her tragic end. Together, these queens enriched the cultural life of the Tudor court. They brought music and dance from Spain, France, and Germany. They adorned the palace in tapestries woven by female artisans. They influenced fashion, layering gowns with embroidered symbols of piety and elegance. Their patronage of composers, playwrights, and poets seeded the flourishing Elizabethan arts that would define England for centuries to come. In every grand masque and subtle minuet, one can sense the imprint of this female alliance. A fusion of tradition and innovation, formality and free expression, this invisible consort network proved a powerful counterweight to Henry's absolute rule. In a system built on male prerogative, these women forged connections that defied expectations, offering each other counsel, comfort, and practical assistance. Their cooperation demonstrated that even within the rigid hierarchies of Tudor England, women could exercise agency by supporting one another. They effected charitable initiatives, educational reforms, and cultural patronage that rippled outward, shaping society beyond the palace gates. Long after the last Tudor queen passed from the stage, Elizabeth I and her successors drew lessons from this sisterhood. They understood that solidarity among women, whether princesses or petitioners, could undergird political stability. They saw that empathy and cooperation, rather than rivalry, could generate enduring institutions of learning, care, and artistic expression. The legacy of Catherine, Anne, Jane, Anne, Catherine, and Catherine Parr lived on in colleges and hospitals, in the vaults of libraries, and in the rhythms of courtly dances. Their actions taught that compassion, when institutionalized through charitable endowments and educational patronage, yields structural change. Thus, the hidden alliance of the 6 Tudor queens became a beacon for future generations. Through them, women learned that in adversity, sisterhood is both shield and catalyst. They proved that the bonds of empathy can transcend political division and personal hardship. And they left a model of collaboration that endures. A reminder that every woman's voice, allied with another's, has the power to transform not just her own circumstances, but the course of history itself. In their quiet solidarity, amid court intrigue and royal ambition, the Tudor queens sowed the seeds of a more compassionate and cultured England, an inheritance we continue to cherish today. And so, dear listener, we come gently to the close of our journey through the hidden chambers of Tudor history. Let your heart beat slow as the candles gutter, casting dancing shadows that play softly across stone walls, as though the very rooms themselves exhale a sigh of relief. In the hush that follows political machinations and whispered intrigues, there lies a deeper truth, that even in the most extravagant courts, vulnerability and courage walk hand in hand. These 6 remarkable women, each in her own way, taught us that power is not merely the roar of armies or the glitter of crowns, but the quiet strength of spirit, the resilience to shape one's own narrative, and the compassion to lift others even when the world seems determined to push them down. Allow your mind's eye to drift from the roar of royal jousts and the echo of council chambers towards something gentler, a flickering hearth where a mother tends a child, or a scholar pores over a candlelit manuscript. The lives of Catherine, Anne, Jane, Anne of Cleves, Catherine Howard, and Catherine Parr remind us that our greatest legacies are written not only in public deeds, but in the solidarity we share, the kindness we extend, and the truths we dare to speak, even when silence seems safer. As you feel your eyelids grow heavy, imagine the distant sound of a harp string, its final note dissolving like mist over a tranquil lake. Let the memories of courtly pageantry fade, replaced by the rustle of leaves on an old oak tree, or the steady drip of water in a quiet grotto. In these moments of stillness, you will find the real inheritance of the Tudor queens, the lesson that adversity can be transformed into empathy, that suffering can give rise to generosity, and that every one of us, however humble or exalted, carries within the spark of untold resilience. Hold on to that warmth as you drift, and know that, like these women, you too possess the power to rewrite your story. Their voices linger in the soft exhale of history, urging you to face each new dawn with both wisdom and grace. Remember that kindness is an act of defiance in a world quick to judge, and that solidarity can build bridges where walls once stood. And now, as sleep beckons and the edges of consciousness blur, I offer you this gentle whisper. May your dreams be filled with courage, compassion, and the quiet triumphs of hearts unbowed. Rest well, dear friend, and when you awake, carry with you the timeless wisdom of those Tudor queens who dared to stand firm in the face of storms. If you enjoyed this intimate passage through history's softer side, please subscribe to our channel. We have many more stories waiting in the wings, tales of hidden strength, silent revolutions, and the extraordinary fragility of the human spirit. Until our next voyage, sleep peacefully and let your imagination wander, for the world of whispers is always just a breath away. Good night.